Hi, welcome to my studio. My name is Debbie Avoux. Oh, and today we're going to be painting a sunset on Bass Lake. This is Poet. Say hi. He's going to help us paint today, right? Don't eat the brushes. Yeah, that's the canvas. Don't ignore me. Let's see a bit. So for your supplies, you're going to need a couple of water cups, some paper towels, and your brushes. I'm using a 1-inch flat brush, a 5/8 inch angular brush, which is my favorite, and I'll explain why later, a number 8 filbert or something similar size, just a smaller brush, and then a tiny brush. I'm using a number 2 round brush, and that's just for the little teeny tiny details. You're also going to need a palette. You can either use a paper plate, a styrofoam plate, or one of these palette pads. For the paints, we're going to need a quinacridone magenta, cadmium yellow, a primary blue, white, and black. So you just want to sketch out where the lake line is, and you want that to be a little bit lower than halfway down the page. And then just rough in a couple of mountain ranges. Just make sure it dips down somewhere, maybe not exactly in the center, maybe a little bit off to the right of the center, because that's where the sun, the brightest part of the sun, is going to be setting. So on your palette, you want to get the blue, the white, the yellow, and the magenta. Don't worry about the black yet, we'll add that later. And we're going to start off by mixing our sky color. So you want to take a big scoop of the white, and then just start with just a tiny bit of that blue and a tiny bit of the magenta. Those colors go a long way, so you just need a little tiny bit, lots of white, and just add tiny bits at a time. And the color we're mixing, we're trying to get like a periwinkle sort of color, so sort of a warm bluish color. And make sure you have enough of that. So again, big scoop of white. We're gonna have to keep adding a lot more white onto the palette because we'll run out of that. And if you need to add just a tiny bit of water to it to help spread it across the canvas, that will help you. And you just want to bring that all the way down till you're just a little bit above the top of the mountain range. So just leave that area that's right above it blank for now. And you may need more white, so just put some more of that on your palette. And then we just want to blend more white into the bottom part of that blue section, so it gets lighter as we get lower. And then we're going to add a little bit of a darker shade of blue towards the very top part. So you can just use the existing blue that you have and add a little bit more of that red and blue into it to make it a little bit deeper. Or just make a fresh new pile of that blue sky color. You're going to want to be real familiar with how to mix that color because we're probably going to need to mix a lot more throughout the painting. So, big scoop of white, a little bit of blue, a little bit of magenta, and just blend that right into the very top part of the sky. And keep that towards the top part so we have a gradation, darker to lighter. Now we're going to mix sort of a mauve color. So start off with a scoop of white, a little bit of magenta, tiny bit of blue. So you want to have a little more magenta than blue on this one. And then we're going to take a little bit of yellow. Again, just start with a tiny bit at first because we don't want it to get like a weird muddy color. So start with a tiny bit and then just mix it up until you get kind of a light mauve shade. Then we're just going to start applying that to the area where the blue sky ended. And you're going to paint this just right above the edges of the mountain ranges. And avoid the section right where the two mountains dip down. We're going to keep that little area for the yellow where the sun's going to go. So just come in a little bit on the right side, a little bit on the left side, and just blend a little bit of that color in. Then as you're doing this, you just want to make sure you barely have any paint on your brush, because we're going to feather it up into the blue sky part so there's not such a harsh line. So if you have too much paint on your brush, just wipe it off on your paper towel. Wipe off as much as you can so your brush is almost dry with just a tiny bit of that mauve color on your brush, and just lightly feather it back and forth so it becomes more of a soft transition between the blue sky and the mauve. And if you find it's not blending easily, you can always take a tiny bit of that lighter blue sky and just blend a little bit of that color right along the edge of where the blue and the mauve meet, and just softly blend your brush back and forth so it's more blended between the two colors. Next, we're going to take a scoop of white, a little bit of yellow, and we're going to make our sun area, and just a teeny tiny bit of magenta. We just want to make a warm yellow color that's not too bright. We're going to tone it down a little bit with that magenta, and then you're going to fill in that little dip where the two mountain ranges dip down. This is going to be where the sun is setting. And then again, you just want to kind of blend that, fill in the white part of the canvas first, and then just sort of feather your brush back and forth really lightly and blend it into that mauve color. Now we're going to take just a little bit of white and put that right down in the deepest groove of the mountains, and just fade that out so it's going to be a little bit lighter, just right in that little pit area. And then you're also going to just streak. If you hold the brush sideways, if we're using that angled brush, hold it sideways, and you can just do some streaks, horizontal streaks, here and there in that lower area, just to give the impression that there's some rays of the sun and layers of clouds. So next we're going to mix the color for the main shadowy clouds. So we're going to take a little bit of magenta, a little bit of blue, and some white. So I'm just mixing it onto that mauve color that we had. That might be dried out already for you. If it's not, just mix, or if it is, mix another mauve, but then we're going to add a little more magenta and a little more blue to it to make it a lavender kind of a shade. And sometimes I'll just test it out on the canvas, because sometimes it looks a little bit different on your palette than it does on whatever you have painted. So we're just mixing lavender, a little bit more on the blue side. So for the clouds, I'm just kind of smashing my brush down, smearing it around back and forth. It helps to really look at pictures of clouds, because you don't want them to be those typical puffy little cartoon looking shapes. So I'm just kind of smearing around, turning my brush different angles, and I don't want a ton of paint on my brush. See how if you can see how it sort of fades out? That's because there's not a whole lot of paint on my brush. So you want it pretty thin. So just keep it pushed down on the canvas and just swirl it around. This does take a little bit of practice just to get a nice wispy cloud shape, but just smear it around. I mean, they're clouds. You can't really go that wrong, because there's all different shapes with clouds out there. So we want to keep kind of a bigger section of clouds on that upper right hand side, and then we're going to add some more faint little faded wispy ones around as well. So now I'm going to mix a little more of that mauve color that we did right there. And we're just going to blend a little more of that into that lower area and create some wispy clouds right above that lower section. And then I'm just going to let you follow along and watch for a while. I'm going to speed up a lot of it so this video doesn't get too long. And the reason why I did such a limited palette as well is so it's easier to follow along. So I'll be holding the palette up for you to see which colors I'm adding for which parts. And again, to get a nice wispy cloud, you want barely any paint on your brush. And that's really going to help you get that wispy feel. So you can see we mixed kind of a coral color. So this one is kind of like the mauve, but it's got a little more yellow and magenta mixed into it, and a touch of white. So it's a little bit lighter. We're going to bring that into some of the lower cloud areas, into that mauve section. And then we're also going to use that same color, and you want to make sure you don't have too much paint on your brush. So you might need to wipe some of the excess off on your paper towel for when we blend it up into these purple clouds here. And you can see here we're just bringing a little bit into the bottom edges of the clouds. So the sun is down below, it's hitting just the bottom part of the clouds. So I'm just dabbing a little bit all along the bottom edges, and then we're just sort of gonna smear it up into the purple. We don't want to cover the whole cloud, we want to leave a little bit of that darker shade on the top. So we're just kind of blending in a little bit of this. And we're going to be adding several layers. We're going to get a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter. We'll add a little bit of yellow later. So just kind of follow along and get this technique down, because we're going to be doing this a whole bunch of times. So you probably noticed that just jumped to like way brighter. What happened was I missed a section of that. I don't know where it went, So when you do that first coral color, then you're going to go back in afterwards and add a little more white to make it a little bit lighter. And you're going to go over on top of the coral, and then you're going to go a little bit lighter, a little more white, maybe even a touch of yellow, and you're going to add a little bit of that. And each time you're going to cover up less and less of the area that you blended that color into before. So notice it gets a little bit brighter on the very edges. So it'll get lighter along the edges. So here I'm just adding light little streaks here and there. There's a lot of white in it. It's a kind of that coral mix with some white added. And if you hold your brush sideways, we're still using that angular brush, you'll notice there's like a pointy part of that angled brush. Make sure that's facing the left. So see how I'm holding the brush there? Make sure that pointy part is to the left, and you're going to get a nice skinny tiny line. Just use the very tip of the brush to get some real fine lines, and make sure the lightest area, see I have that light yellow streak, is closest to the sun. So you want everything that's closest to where that sun is going to be a little brighter and a little bit lighter. So now we're going to add some of the lake colors. So we're mixing some of this warm golden color. And that section where you see all of that warm yellow, we're going to create that same color onto where the lake is. So just below that line that you created for the lake edge, and we're just going to spread it out. We'll go right along the edge of that line and just blend it down. And we're basically going to take the same colors that are in the sky and duplicate that on the water. And if you clean off your brush and just get a tiny bit of water on it, it'll be real easy for you to blend those colors just a tad, right where the lines meet each other. You can blend those in on the lake. Now we're just taking a little bit of that purple shade. I added a tiny bit more magenta, so it's kind of a warmer purpley shade, and just a tiny bit on my brush, and I'm just sort of blending that purple right into those coral shades, and just a tiny bit. You don't want to cover it up, but we just want to make those blend together a little bit more. Now, if you decide you don't like some of your clouds, you can always mix that same blue sky color and just cover them up. But don't get too worried yet. We can always fix things at the end. But if you realize you made some mistakes and you want to cover up some things, it's perfectly okay. I do it all the time. This is another reason why I said make sure you get really good at mixing that blue sky in the beginning, because you're probably going to need to make more of it. And I am working on some color mixing videos that I don't have them quite ready yet, but once I do, I'm going to put a link down below. So it'd be a really good idea, if you're not real familiar with mixing your own colors, to watch these videos. They're going to be a huge help to you, and they're just going to make life so much easier in all your future paintings. So hopefully I'll have that link up for you soon. I am switching to the second smallest brush now. It's the number 8 filbert, and we're just going to use this to do some smaller, finer details. Okay, now we're finally adding some black to the palette. We're going to take a big scoop of the magenta and mix it into a pile of black. You're going to need a lot of magenta because the black goes a long way. So don't start off with too much black. You want to start off with magenta, add black into it, and then add a little bit of white. You never want to use pure black because it's going to really make your painting look dead. So we're just going to make sure it's almost like a shade of a reddish purple color, and you're going to paint your whole mountain range. If you need to add a little bit of water to help it go on smoother, you can do that. Just don't add too much because you don't want to thin it out and then have it be see-through. So for that right-hand mountain range, that one's a little bit further behind the one on the left. So we're going to mix that same shade, but we're going to add a little more white to it just to make it a little lighter, and that's going to set it back in the distance a little more. And then you're going to take your, we're using the medium brush again. Sorry, I forgot to tell you that. And then the tippy, pointy part of the brush right there, you can just use that to create little tiny trees. So if you just kind of pat down and just make them look like little miniature Christmas trees, kind of like different heights, just to give it a lot of texture. It'll make it look like a real forest-filled mountain range. Then you want to take a little bit of your sky color, and you're going to use your medium brush, and you're using the little pointy part of the brush, and you're just going to add a little streak all along the base of your mountain range. And that's going to separate the mountain range from the reflected mountain range on the lake. So you want to mix a color, the same color as the mountain range, but we're going to add some white to it to make it lighter. And we're just going to emulate those shapes of those mountains in the lake. So the reflection of the mountains. And you want to make sure you keep all these streaks going from left to right, not up and down, because it won't look like it's reflecting in the water. And just sort of copy the shape of that mountain range. And then to get the trees in there, we're going to switch to that little tiny brush. And then these, you're going to do little tiny horizontal lines coming out from the base of the mountain range. And the reflection of the mountain doesn't need to be the exact same shape. As you notice, it's just kind of flattened out in this picture, and that's perfectly fine. But you just want to make sure the little tiny trees are going to be little horizontal lines so it feels like ripples in the water. And you don't have to copy every single tree exactly. This is just an implication that there's trees popping up over the mountain. So for this next part, we're going to be using several different colors. We're going to start off with the blue sky color, but you will just follow along and you'll see which colors I'm mixing. We're pretty much going to be taking all of the colors that we used up in the sky, and we're going to reflect that down into the water in little ripples on top of the water. What you want to do is use your medium brush, and you're going to use that little pointy tippy part, and you're pretty much just painting with the tip of the brush, holding the brush sideways and just doing really skinny lines. They can have a slight little wave to them, like a little wiggly line, but try to keep it fairly horizontal. You don't want it to be really, really wavy, otherwise it's going to look like there's huge waves going through the water, and that's not really the scene we're doing here. We're doing kind of a calm, relaxing sunset scene, so just keep those lines nice and straight. Then when you get to the area right below the sun, you're going to put a little white on your brush, and you're going to do little tiny horizontal lines coming right down from right where those mountain ranges dip, where that sun is peeking up right in between there. And then you want to get some extra bright white, add a tiny bit more white right to that little section where the sun's peeking up, and then get a little more white, and you're just going to add little teeny lines here and there. I took my second smallest brush and just faded it out a little bit so it didn't look like a perfectly round circle. So you can just take that little tiny brush, sort of blend it in. And then right below that little dot in the water, just here and there you want to add just a few little white highlights. Don't go too crazy, but just a few here and there. And that'll give that extra glisten from the sun hitting the water. So I stepped back and I took a little break to look at the painting, and I decided I don't like those clouds that are on the right hand side. They're too choppy and there's too many. So this happens from time to time where you look back later and go, that was a bad decision. So I want to sort of blend these together more and just make it like a big, huge cloud that's sort of all faded into each other. So what I'm doing is I'm adding some of a pinky coral color, and again, I'm not putting a ton of paint on my brush. I wiped off most of it. I'm gonna blend the brush through some of the sky areas just to sort of blend that big cluster of clouds together a little bit more. And you don't have to do this. If you like how yours looks, perfect. Like, don't touch it. But I just wasn't very happy with it. So I'm gonna work on it a little bit more here. Now I'm just going through and brightening up the little white parts, so I'm just adding a little bit more white to that sun and a couple more little tiny highlights, and just in the areas where I feel like they need it. So now it's up to you. If you want to leave it just like this, you can be done with it, or if you want to add that pine tree that I'm going to add in silhouette on the left hand side, you can do that now. And the color we're going to mix for this is the same color we did for the mountain range, but we're going to go a little bit darker. So add a little more black, because when items are closer to you, when they're in shadow, they're going to be darker. And that's the reason why we did that back mountain a little bit lighter. As things get further back, they're going to be lighter, and as they get closer, they're going to be darker. So we're just going to paint in sort of a post shape towards the left hand side of your canvas. And then we're going to add, and I'm using my medium brush again that has that angle on it, and then we're going to add some branches. So the branches, it's kind of up to you where you want to put them. I wouldn't go too wild with them. Start simple, and if you want to add more later, you can. But always make sure when you add branches, and we'll switch brushes to the little tiny brush for that part, you always want to make sure that the base of the branch is going to be a little bit thicker, because as a branch grows off of the trunk, it's always going to be a little bit thicker at that base, and then it will get skinnier and thinner as it gets towards the end. And whenever I put a bend in a branch, I always like to make a little bit of a bump so it looks more natural. So pretty much anytime a branch turns, it tends to be a little bit thicker, and then it thins out again. So almost like an elbow. And then when you're doing these pine needles, I'm just kind of doing them, make sure all the needles are about the same length, and then they kind of flare out like a little fan. And just use the very, very tip of the brush, and don't push down hard, and you should be able to get nice skinny lines. Sometimes it helps to sort of twist the brush and drag it on your palette to make it nice and sharp and pointy, and then just barely use the very tip of it with a really light touch. And having a little bit of water mixed into your paint also helps. If the paint's a little bit thinned out, it's going to flow better for you, and you'll be able to get those little tiny lines. That was my son peeking in there. There he is again. He thinks he's pretty funny, which he is, but I get him back. He wasn't expecting that one. So now I'm going to be adding some highlights to the side of the tree trunk and branches. So I'm picking up all the colors that are in the sky of the clouds, like the coral and the peachy color, some of that light yellow color, and I'm just starting with one color at a time, and I'm just using that angled brush, the very tippy part of the brush, that little pointy part, and I'm just streaking in some lines, short lines, long lines, little itty bitty lines. I'm keeping most of them towards the right half of the trunk, so it looks like the sun is hitting the side of the tree trunk. And I'm just going to streak a few little lines in there, and then I'll mix some of the other colors, pick up some of those peachy colors, some of the coral colors, and then I'm also hitting the edges of the branches. So like the bottom edges of the branches, just picking up all those colors that are in the clouds. And then if you find you end up doing too much, you can always take a little bit of your black mixture and just cover right over it and paint it again. This one's really easy to fix mistakes on. And then just do as many as you like. You might want to pump them up even brighter to make that really look like the sun's hitting it hard. And you know, it just looks great. You can't really go wrong with this. And that was the last step. We are all finished. Thank you so much for watching, and comment down below and let me know what kind of things you'd like to learn in the future. Please also subscribe if you would, and hit that little bell and you will get notifications when I upload new videos. I'm planning on uploading weekly, and we'll be doing all kinds of different things. Today was my very first YouTube video, and I'm not gonna lie, it was scary. I don't know why it was so scary, but it was just awkward and scary. I don't know. I hope you enjoy your day and take care.